Episode 2, Warriors. Let's talk about it. Obviously, spoilers ahead. So, we pick up where we left off at the end of last episode, that being in the Southern Air Temple, and something that I entirely blanked over is that at the end of last episode, we didn't introduce Momo, which is the other most important thing about the original episode for the Southern Air Temple. So, we start off with that in this episode, and in the bag where Momo is trying to steal some food, Katara also immediately finds the waterbending scroll, which is given to her by her grandmother instead of the usual where they steal it from pirates. So I'm presuming that that pirate episode is just straight up not going to happen, which I'm honestly just kind of fine with. I like it as an episode, but it is easily written around. The only thing that really comes back from it is the fact that there's a little bit of a power boost in the waterbending ability, specifically for Katara. And the pirates end up blowing up Zuko's ship in the original series, which can easily be replaced by either Zhao or Azula when she inevitably gets introduced, because she will be introduced in Season 1, from what I understand. So that's easily replaced, and it's like a lot of screen time, which can probably be spent better somewhere else. So I understand that, and at least they still have that scroll, and for people who know the trajectory of the series, seeing this scroll this early on in this episode is just a signal of, hey, that story is probably not going to happen. That said, coming back to something that I said in the last video, is Aang getting the necklace from Gyatso, that probably being something that's going to connect up throughout the season or the series as a whole. That's just something to connect the last episode to the beginning of this episode to make them feel more cohesive, a little bit of a through line, because he just uses that to bury Mon Gyatso, which honestly is fine. I didn't really know what it was going to be. That works as it is. Originally, of course, this was one episode. The original episode, he doesn't bury Gyatso, but originally the whole Southern Air Temple thing was one episode, and knowing that, you can tell, but I don't think it's really, like, it works as a end to an episode and then, like, some connective tissue to start the next episode off with. It works fairly well that way. The only thing, we talked about that last video, so I won't talk about it too much right now, is there's less emotional build-up for Aang's eventual Avatar State moment. But the Avatar State is actually the driving force behind this episode, because Aang entered that last episode, and it's very important that he did, because he's now worried about being in the Avatar State and hurting people, and we know Aang being a pacifist and all, so that makes fully sense. So they go to Kyoshi Island not to ride a elephant koi, which is kind of too bad, because that's usually something like Aang's more juvenile nation, like Aang's more youthful nature is something that really shines through there, and it kind of gets lost here. They go to Kyoshi Island because Aang thinks, hey, maybe I can learn something from Kyoshi, which does make him a little bit more of like a serious, worried character, but you know, he just kind of learned that he is a living nuke, so still makes sense to me that that really has the forefront of his mind. So they go to Kyoshi Island, they check out a shrine to Kyoshi there, and they immediately get attacked by the Kyoshi warriors, where Aang blasts a couple of them about, and then Katara shouts, wait, he's the Avatar, hold the fuck up, don't attack us. To which Suki says, that is ridiculous. If he was the Avatar, that would have been signs. And frankly, in the original show, it was already a little ridiculous that they didn't connect the dots between this guy with a fucking arrow tattoo on his face not being the Avatar until he shows it and says it and whatever. But in this case, they literally did see him airbend before proclaiming that he is the Avatar, and they still don't believe him. And of course, the moment Suki says, there would have been signs, there's a literal light down from the heavens shining upon Aang. I mean, calm the fuck on. You can't take this seriously, right? That's ridiculous. Now, the thing that we really want to talk about this episode, I think, is the controversy around Sokka being a sexist piece of shit or not. And I was one of the people that was really worried that it would really undermine a lot of his character arc, especially early on, the first steps into becoming more of an accepting person, and then eventually stepping more into a leader role. And seeing this episode, they actually handled that pretty well. I still don't think that their reasoning for removing the sexism checks out, because it not being appropriate in a modern adaptation is just dumb. It was a character flaw, and characters are allowed to have flaws. If anything, if you want to make a statement about that being a bad thing, have it as a character flaw that needs to be overcome. I don't think the reasoning checks out. I still think that is stupid. But I think that they did do it pretty well. Because instead they just make him even more of a bumbling idiot at first, which then also nicely contrasts with how capable Suki is, making her look even more like a badass. We'll get a little bit more into that in a moment as well. I want to point out something else in comparison to last episode, because last episode I spent quite a long time bitching about the fan service, the reference, the whatever of Gran going, fire, earth, water, air. Long ago, the 4 nations lived in harmony, and the entire spiel that we've heard all 100 times, because that's literally the opening dialogue or monologue of the original show. And I felt like that was forced and annoying. This episode has another reference, and that is the bit of the intro where Aang does the air scooter and smashes face first into a statue. It pretty much does that entire shot exactly like in the intro sequence. And the moment you see that shot happening and you see he's on an air scooter, you're like, I know where this is going. But it takes like 5 seconds. It's a visual joke while some other dialogue, which is actually relevant, is happening. It doesn't take away any screen time from anything else, and it works. It gets a good chuckle out of you, and then it just moves the fuck on. So that one works. That one isn't as bothersome to me. And in contrast to Aang's reason for coming to Kyoshi and not being as full of excitement to write elephant kois and eventually the Unagi, which, by the way, the Unagi just entirely not present here. I kind of get it from a CG budget perspective, but I'm a little sad at the same time. We do see Aang just playing around with some other kids on Kyoshi Island, and I'm very happy that they did include that, because they do need to include some of Aang just being a kid. The whole thing about Aang's character is that he is a person becoming the Avatar. In contrast to something like The Legend of Korra, which is the Avatar becoming a person, right? And I don't know if they have plans of doing a Korra series after this. I imagine if this goes well, they might do that. They might do a Kyoshi series, to be honest, because Kyoshi is very popular. But I really do think that having Aang every so often be able to just be a kid is very much a good thing. And they did insert that back into here a little bit more forcefully than it just being a character trait of him wanting to write the elephant koi, but I can kind of deal with that, honestly. It's not that big a deal. Now, getting back to Sokka training Suki, or at least trying to train Suki. This was another one of those things where I was like, how is this going to work? But they make it work fairly well without it being overtly a sexist thing. And he still gets really humbled really quickly. He tries to teach her to throw a boomerang. He hits one like pumpkin melon thing. And she's like, oh, that's cool. She throws her fucking fan and decapitates 4 other ones without too much trouble. To which Sokka responds, oh yeah, but we Water Tribe warriors are more like hand-to-hand combat. To which she beats him up within like a few seconds very badly as well. Without him ever having to overtly say some sexist shit. But him just presuming to give her training in and of itself shows a certain level of sexism, which is a lot more subtle and nuanced. So they didn't entirely get rid of it. And that's kind of what I was afraid of, because he still needs to be that cocky, arrogant bastard, which needs to be humbled. And that very much did happen in this episode. Still not entirely to the degree that I would have liked to, though. Because then, the scene where he goes to humbly ask Suki, can I please be trained under you? Can you please teach me? Doesn't really happen. He just like snoops in a little bit. He spies in on the training. Suki sends everybody away. And Suki's like, you come in here, I'll train you. Which takes away the chance for Sokka to be humble about it, which I don't like. And then we get like a 2-3 minute training scene between them in which they have 2 slow motion, oh my god, we are so in love looking into each other's eyes moments, which I cringed at the first one. The first one is definitely also the worst of the 2. I cringed at the first one. I was like, okay, but it's like a Netflix adaptation. I get it, right? But then within a minute they do it again, which is just entirely unnecessary. And then they do the... I hate this, right? Then eventually they do the "oh, we're about to kiss, but something interrupts us." Just why? Why do that? All within that one scene, right? If it was one of those things, or if those were in separate scenes, it wouldn't bother me so much. But the fact that they all crammed that inside like a 3-minute scene, which means that there's a like romantic tension thing, which is way overdone, by the way, in all of the cases, about once a minute during that scene, maybe once a minute and a half. That's just too much. That's not done well, in my opinion. Anyway, back to Aang, the actual like important stuff here. He's trying to figure out how to communicate with Kyoshi. He figures it out, and he can just kind of do it. I suppose he was at like a shrine to Kyoshi, which might have made it easier, much like in the original show, where he could communicate with Roku. Interestingly enough, he communicates with Kyoshi here before Roku, which is an interesting thing. There it needed to be the winter solstice to do that, and he can just kind of do it. And honestly, that much I am fine with, more or less. I don't really mind that. I still feel like it's not overtly set that communicating with the other avatars requires being in a specific location. Later it is set that something else requires being in a specific location. I'm kind of just connecting the two of them, honestly. So I'm assuming that Aang is not just going to be able to 3 times an episode meditate and just check in with Kyoshi or Roku or Yang-chan or whatever, right? So that's not that big of a deal to me. What is a big deal to me is the fact that they absolutely butchered Kyoshi's personality in this. Kyoshi's personality in this is the online fan interpretation of Kyoshi, and in no way really the more canon version of Kyoshi. And that's even discounting the books, because I can understand that we don't count the books here in the comparison, but even if we take the Kyoshi from the original series, she wasn't as, well, she was ruthless, but she literally says in this episode, I wrote down the quote here, you asked it what it is to be the Avatar. It is to be a merciless warrior. Like that is what people online think Kyoshi is like. But it straight up isn't, okay? If you're one of those people, I'm about to annoy you, because we think that due to the whole Shin the Conqueror thing in the original show, right? She happily admits to killing him, and then in the finale, when Aang is doing his talks with all the avatars, she's like, yeah, probably should kill the Fire Lord. Maybe a good idea, yeah? This takes it up to 11, but in the original show, there is a lot of nuance to that conversation that's just nowhere to be found here. In the original show, Aang even says, like, but you didn't kill him. He was just too stubborn to get out of the way and fell to his own death as a result. And Kyoshi says, personally, I don't really see the difference. And in contrast to that, in this show, at least in this scene, in this episode, she's like, yeah, you just gotta get killing people, man. Just go out there and murder some people. That's not literally what she says, but that's kind of what it comes down to. So I am not a huge fan of the characterization for Kyoshi so far here. And I got a message because I've been texting people about these episodes so far as well. So sorry if you heard that in the background. Anyway, that is a good point to veer off this Kyoshi thing, because I feel like I'm going to be annoying people quite a lot talking about this more. That said though, there's a real good point to point this out, so I'm just going to slot it in here. I really like the way they're portraying Iroh, not as in he's accurate to the original show, because he's not. He's a very, well, not a very different character, but he's more goofy, he's more jokey. It is a Netflix show, I suppose. They do tend to do that. But he's also, like, his wisdom so far doesn't seem to be as deep and as valuable. That said, in the first half especially, or more or less the entirety of season 1 of the original show, his wisdom just doesn't go that deep to begin with, so there's room and time for that to grow. So far, I do like Iroh's portrayal though. Again, he's a little bit different, but different isn't necessarily bad, as I stated in the previous video in this series. So I like it. I like Iroh. Matter of fact, I kind of like Zuko. And I haven't talked about him yet because he's kind of a throwaway character in this, but I also kind of like Zhao. He is a lot more like political about things rather than just being sneaky. which is good. At the end of the episode, he even like makes a deal with Zuko and Iroh, like, oh yeah, we can join together forces and we will have twice as many resources. To which I say, I don't know, man. You have like a lot more resources than the banished prince, presumably. So I don't know what you stand to gain from that, but he gains their trust is what he does. And at the same time, he writes a letter to Fire Lord Ozai saying, hey, you might want to know a thing. The Avatar is back. And I have to assume that in that letter, it also says that Zuko tried to keep that a secret, because discrediting Zuko is probably something that Zhao would be kind of into as well. All that said, I do like Kyoshi just showing up and kicking some ass. This is the point where they set up that you can only have like these Avatar embodiments in places that have shrines to the Avatar. So Kyoshi Island has a Kyoshi shrine, so Kyoshi can physically show up and kick ass. Presumably by the time they go to like Crescent Moon Island, whatever it's called, that will have a shrine to Avatar Roku, we'll probably see Avatar Roku show up in the flesh and kick some ass and maybe do some lava bending. You know how it goes. I do like that as a limitation. I'm assuming that limitation extends to communicating with those avatars, at least for the time being, until Aang like grows a little bit more spiritually. Kyoshi showing up, though, also made me realize something, and that is that the bending in this version of the show really is just magic and not like a magical martial art. She literally just flies all over the place, which we also saw in the last episode. We to some extent see that with Sozin's Comet in the original show, but even then there's like a lot of weight and they're working with their momentum. They're not just superhero flying all over the place, which is what's happening here. And I'm by no means a martial artist, so I can't be sure about this, but looking at the movements, feeling just the general vibe of how things go here, I don't feel like the bending is nearly as much based on martial arts as the original show. And that's not to compare it to the original show, but that means that there is just less of like a cultural source material there, which makes it less deep. It has less depth. It's just moving some limbs around and fire happens, rather than there being a like spiritual and like disciplined art behind it. The line in the first episode that we usually get in the original show from Iroh, like fire bending comes from the breath, not from the muscles. The breath becomes energy in the body, and that energy extends past your limbs, becoming fire. We lacked that in the last episode as well, and with how at least fire bending, but most bending at this point is portrayed, it feels like they're not really focusing on that more mental, spiritual side of bending, which is usually the more important side of bending. For certain elements more so than others, of course, but it seems like they might be putting less focus on that, which is, in my opinion, is a kind of a shame. So this episode was a lot less positive than the first one. I still liked a lot about this episode, don't get me wrong. There's only a couple of things that I really kind of disliked about this episode, and the things that I did dislike, like Kyoshi's portrayal, really do bother me quite a lot, compared to a lot of the other issues in the first episode and this episode, which are pretty minor. As it stands right now, I still have very much good hopes. The show looks really good. Visually, it's a fantastic. The pacing of everything actually works out relatively well. Of course, last episode was kind of 3 episodes combined. This is just an extended version of Kyoshi Island episode, because to a certain extent, there's also some other bits and pieces from like information and exposition that happen in this episode that are pulled from other episodes. But for the most part, this is just an extended Kyoshi Island episode. And I think that was something that we very much needed out of this series. And that's what they're giving us. So, but even then, the pacing is held up quite well. I'm curious to see how future episodes balance between extending existing episodes and merging existing episodes. But I suppose I'll have to start watching episode 3 in order to answer that. So I'll be back tomorrow, hopefully, with some more stuff on all that.